So I want to jump right in now to bring on my very special guest co-host for today. So Anna, if you'll go to the next slide, I am so excited to welcome Janice Gassam. I will tell you that Dr. Janice and I have spent some time chatting even in preparation for today. And I could not be more excited for you all to know about the wealth of knowledge she has and the strong conviction she has around this work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So let me give her a formal introduction. Dr. Janice Gassam is the founder of BWG Business Solutions, LLC, a consultancy designed to help organizations create more inclusive environments. Janice facilitates workshops, delivers keynote speeches, and awareness talks to spark important dialogue about workplace equity. Janice has had the opportunity to collaborate with organizations such as Yale University, Nordstrom, H&M, PayPal, Vimo, among many others. She is the host of the Diversity Dinner Dialogue, a free public workshop designed to address issues around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Dr. Janice is the author of the new book, Dirty Diversity. I have a copy of it. It is great. A practical guide to foster an equitable and inclusive workplace for all. She is a senior contributing writer for Forbes, having authored nearly 200 articles. Actually, now it has been 200 articles. You reached that milestone. Yes. And she also has a PhD in organizational psychology and teaches undergraduate and graduate courses in business and psychology. She is a TEDx speaker and the host of Dirty Diversity podcast, where she discusses all things diversity, equity, and inclusion. So at this time, we're going to stop sharing the screen so I can bring my friend on, Dr. Janice, to just greet this audience and to share with us in her own way a welcome message. And so, Janice, at this time, what would you like to say to this audience? Let's hear from you.
Hi, everyone. I just want to first of all say, Dr. White, thank you so much for the opportunity to come onto your platform. I'm so excited about our conversation, and I'm really excited that 74 of you are here for this discussion, and I can't wait to meet. I know there's some that we're not familiar with each other, but I always love the opportunity to connect with other people. So I'm just excited and really grateful for the opportunity to have this conversation.
Awesome. Well, we're so glad that you're here. So thank you so much for accepting my invite. So we have done a good bit of talking about all of your accolades and your background, and I think that's always appropriate. But I always like to make sure I follow it up with, tell us your story that somebody cannot just go and find in your bio, but who are you at your core? Tell us about your story.
So I a little distracted.
Yes, I just removed someone. I couldn't figure out what was going on there, but I thought it was the best choice. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So let's see. I guess I've always been really fascinated with diversity and inclusion. I started a YouTube channel where I was talking about race specifically, and just my experiences coming into my Blackness, because I think growing up, I never really felt Black enough. And my parents are from Cameroon, so I was trying to navigate being part of their culture and being usually the only Black person in predominantly white environments. And I went to private schools. And so I think I've always been fascinated with racial identity and how we come into this idea of who we are based on our culture and our background. So I would say that the passion for diversity and inclusion was always there. But it's just grown and evolved and changed over time. And I'm excited that we're at a moment where people are more open to talking about things like race, because for so long, I feel like I was made to kind of feel like those weren't things that we should be talking about. It's very divisive to talk about race. So I'm again really happy that we're in this moment where people are very open to listening and to learning more.
I love that. And you're right. I think that people's appetite has increased. And I love to see it, because without dialogue, we can't help expose each other to different perspectives where we're willing to go on this journey of educating ourselves and learning. And so I appreciate you bringing that to the fore. So this has been a big week. There's lots that's happened that I want to just kind of get you to react to. So Senator Kamala Harris, what are your thoughts there?
I'm excited. I know that I feel like as a woman, women get critiqued and criticized 10 times harder than men. And now as a woman of color, I think that there's a lot of issues around, is she Black? Is she Indian? Is she really American since her parents were both immigrants? So I think it goes back to that racial identity. And I like her. I've read many things about her. I know that people are a little iffy on her record, and I've heard people criticize her and say that she's locked up a lot of Black and brown people within the communities. But I think that I'm hopeful with the change she wants to spark and she wants to bring. So I'm really just excited about the opportunity for us to have the first woman of color VP. And I think that regardless of whichever way that the election goes, it's a monumental moment regardless. And I wish I had gotten a newspaper. I got a newspaper when Obama was elected, but I got the Washington Post, but I wasn't able to get a newspaper a few days ago. But I think it's an exciting moment. And I think that regardless of who's running, there's always going to be some sort of critique or criticism, but I'm excited for it.
I am too. I think she's highly qualified. And I love the fact that so many people now can sit back and see themselves as being able to aspire to those types of roles. As you mentioned, she checks many boxes.
Mm-hmm.
I think that women in general, we're standing a little bit taller, this week.
Yeah.
And of course, those who attended HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, they're standing very tall this week. And so it's exciting. It's really exciting. And as you mentioned, a very monumental time. So 8/13, just yesterday, was Black Women's Equal Pay Day. Again, lots is happening this week, and so it's very appropriate that you're my guest co-host today. And I want to dig a little bit into this because I think that there's something to be said for becoming more willing to have the conversation around salaries, because the more exposure people have to the inequities, I think the pressure is greater for people to then, especially those in leadership, to then begin to correct that. And I think that's an important point. And you have strong thoughts about this, obviously. Your article in Forbes, if Black Lives Matter, pay your Black women equitably. I love that. So what I want to do, okay, Anna, can we mute everyone, please? Thank you. So what I want us to do is, I want you just to respond, and people can go and find that article. It is in Forbes, it's phenomenal, but I want you just to give us kind of a high level of what sentiments do you have around that led you to that particular article.
I think, and thank you for sharing that. I think for me, what is frustrating is when I started consulting a few years ago, I didn't know anybody personally that I was close with that was doing consulting. Most of my close friends and the people that I'm close with work a 9-to-5 sort of job. So I was looking for guidance and direction. I didn't really feel like I had it. So I had to read a lot of books and Google a lot of things. And when it came to my prices and my rates, I think that's one area where I had a little bit of imposter syndrome. And I was like, should I be charging these rates? Is it right to charge companies thousands of dollars? Am I worth that? So, once I started, getting into the work and doing more and more, what I was finding was that, as I got more experience, companies would ask me to come in. And a lot of times they would ask me to do work for free. And I've gone through so many pick your brain sessions of like, oh, we have this diversity, equity, and inclusion issue. And I know that you had a LinkedIn post where you addressed this, Dr. White, but it's for me, I feel like I've gone through the same thing where, especially when I graduated from school a few years ago, I was looking for diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and people would reach out to me with what I thought were opportunities, and they would pick my brain about their diversity and inclusion issues, and then nothing would materialize from it.
Right.
So I felt like, I just felt like it would, the pick your brain sessions, I'm tired of them. And especially in a moment like now, in the beginning of June, actually, a company reached out to me and wanted me to talk about racial equity. And when I asked her if she wanted me to email her a proposal that had my rates, she said, oh, I thought this was going to be like a free, we don't usually pay the people that come in and facilitate these discussions. And I was like, okay, so you want me to come in and educate your employees, or thousands of employees, on a topic that's very sensitive, and you want me to provide you with free labor as a person of color. And I just posted on LinkedIn that I think it's frustrating that, there's this mindset where it's like free education. And I feel like it is important to give people resources. Like, I feel like these intentional conversations are a free resource to the public. You have books out, but I also think that with your knowledge and expertise, if people value that, they should compensate you for it. So for me, I think as a consultant, it's really, really frustrating that, someone could charge $30,000 for doing the same work as us. Yet as a Black woman, I feel like I don't always get that fair compensation. And I think part of it is knowing how to advocate for yourself. And Bozoma St. John, I saw an interview she did recently where she was talking about how when you're negotiating your salary as a woman, especially as a woman of color, you should be the one giving the first number, which I'd never heard that advice before. I had always thought it was you wait for them to give a number and make an offer, and then you can counter it. But she said, throw out your number, and how much you want to make, and what, and add tax and add all of those things.
Yeah.
And companies have to go back then and tell you, well, we don't have it. And she said that a lot of times they'll adhere to whatever number you throw out there. So I just found that to be really great advice. I saw that video a few weeks ago, and that kind of goes against anything I'd ever heard when it comes to salary negotiations. But I think that that's why I'm so passionate, because I feel like if we allow companies to not compensate us properly, they will. And to me, if you're committed to diversity and inclusion, but particularly to Black Lives Matter, you're posting the squares, you're posting the statements, you really have to show that you care through compensating your employees equitably and fairly, and through other activities that you do within the workplace.
Absolutely, Dr. Janice. I cannot agree with you. I mean, I'm nodding here the whole entire time. I tell people often that there's a cost to picking my brain. I have not been on this journey of gaining all of this knowledge to be able to help organizations to lead more inclusively for nothing. And so, but, to your point, I also deeply believe in extending myself and being able to give back, but I don't want that to be the expectation. And that's why I share it even with this audience. Intentional conversations, as long as I'm doing them, they will always be free, because that's my way of kind of exposing the knowledge and people's knowledge to others. And then there's even some courtesy, opportunities that are available through my website. But yeah, we work hard to be practitioners in this space. And I think there is something to be said for getting people to a place where they're respecting that. So thank you for amplifying that. And this brings me to the next question, which is about your diversity dinner dialogues, which you offer for free, and they've been going on for quite some time. So what inspired that? And talk a little bit about how others in this community can become aware of when the next one is.
Yeah, I felt like it's always important to have those free resources. And I felt like, aside from writing the articles, one of the things that frustrated me when I first moved to New York, so I moved to New York in 2012, and I graduated my PhD program in 2017. And when I graduated, I was like, I want a diversity, equity, and inclusion role. I want some sort of role. So I was going to so many different events in the city. And what I was finding was that most of the events that I went to were like panel discussions, where there were maybe 3 or 4 people on a panel who were chief diversity officers in different companies. And they were offering people advice on how to navigate being a diverse employee. But it wasn't really people I could network with. And as you know, if you all remember from in-person panels, after the panel, especially if it's like a superstar in the field, everyone kind of runs up to the person. So I never had a chance to talk to the people. And I'm big with, I'm a very extroverted person, so I love to network. And I never had a chance, especially I'm going by myself, I don't know anyone. And it's a little bit, even as an extrovert, difficult to just be like, hey, Nika, I'm Janice. It was a little bit challenging. So I felt like I wanted to create a space where people were able to network informally with different people. And at the first diversity dinner dialogue that I held in February of 2019, the diversity head at Venmo and PayPal came, and she found it on LinkedIn or on Eventbrite. She came, I was able to speak with her, and now she's a friend of mine, but just through that networking. So I didn't want to create a space where it was because I feel like when it comes to equity and inclusion, I don't really feel like people can be experts. I feel like we all have our own experiences and we're experts of our experiences. So I just wanted to create a space where we were all equal and we could all talk about our diversity and inclusion issues. We could network with other people and we could hopefully like learn something at the end of it. So it was nice because I always tried to put the chairs in a circle, because I didn't want it to be like I'm the expert and you are I wanted everyone to feel equal. And the chief diversity officer at Papa John's, I'm connected with her on LinkedIn, and she saw that and she said, oh, Papa John's would love to sponsor your diversity dinner dialogue. So that was nice. I missed the pizza because I love pizza. So I miss the in-person events, but I'm going to revamp the diversity dinner dialogues in September. So we took a break for the summer. And luckily we did, because all of these things happened with the protests and all of that. So it was a very busy summer for me, but I definitely want to get back into it. And I can put the link to the mailing list. So if you just add yourself to my mailing list, you'll get an email when the next one is happening.
No, that is great. Well, I love your diversity dialogues, and you reference.
Yeah, and thank you for coming. I know you've been to it quite a few, and you always have great input.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for making that available to so many people and at no cost. I keep saying that resources abound right now for those who really want to educate themselves. But you referenced Victoria Russell, who was our guest co-host last week. And I love to see all these connections. You know, this community seems so small, but it's actually much larger the more we continue to do this work. And I love the fact that, again, greater respect is now coming forth for this area and this discipline. So you do a lot of anti-racism training and talks. You know, one of the things I talked about in your opening is that you do these awareness talks. And you have really strong opinions about the type of people that are best positioned, let me put it that way, best positioned to really do that work. And I share a little bit of that with you, but I want you to talk about it. So what I'm referring to, because it's come up actually in this session as well, people have asked, can non-Black Indigenous people of color do this work and do it well and be effective at it? What's your response to that?
And thank you for asking. I was talking with Kay, who's on the call now, I believe. She's a great DEI practitioner based out of Madrid, Spain. But we were having this conversation and you know, it's a little frustrating to me because I think since June, just from my vantage point, all of a sudden everyone does racial equity work and anti-racism workshops. And I have to preface it by saying I bought the book, White Fragility. I've read it. I enjoyed it. But I read an article recently that was saying that Robin DiAngelo, who's the author of this very popular book, maybe you've all read it, White Fragility, she makes $30,000 per workshop. And as I was reading, I was like, okay, I think every author should make money off of their book. I have no problem with that. But when it comes to anti-racism workshops, I just personally feel like they should be led by Black, Indigenous people of color, because I think it's one thing to research something, and you could research as much as you want until you're blue in the face. But I think that experience trumps research. So my experience as a Black woman, you could have as much research knowledge as you want, but I think when you're talking specifically about racial equity, those conversations should be led by people who've experienced things like racial microaggressions. I think as a white person, you don't understand a racial microaggression, just my personal opinion. But I do think that anyone of any race can lead diversity, equity, and inclusion work within workplaces. So I posted something on LinkedIn, and I think a few people were a little bit confused. And I was not saying, because I have close friends who are white, who do diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And I think that you can certainly be a diversity and inclusion head. You can do the work within your organization. But I think when it comes to racial equity and anti-racism workshops, I think that's very nuanced, a nuanced aspect of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I do think that BIPOC people should be leading those, because I also think it feels a little bit icky. To me, I just feel, I don't like the idea of a white person profiting off of something that benefits them. So I just personally, I don't like the idea of somebody making, that's just me personally. I just kind of feel like it's a little bit backwards, because in a way you're, I kind of liken it to the saying that I heard about doctors. And my husband's in the health field, so I'm, not speaking against them, but it's kind of like doctors are in business because people are sick and there's a problem that they have to solve. So it's profitable in a way for people to be sick. So the same with, racial equity, where, people who do this work, you're doing the work because there's an issue and it's benefiting you in a way that this problem sort of exists. So I do feel like it's a little bit backwards, in my opinion, for white people to be leading these anti-racism efforts and these workshops. I think you should really be amplifying the voices of BIPOC people and listening to us and listening to our experiences.
Now, I appreciate that. And I said this before we actually started admitting people into the room. But one of the things that I really admire about your leadership and this space of DEI is that you have such strong convictions about it and you're true to it. And I think that what I admire is your willingness to talk about subjects that a lot of people are thinking and expressing internally, but they're not willing to go there with it. And I said to Janice before we started that we're going to go there today because I think it's important. And I share some of your sentiments, but I will also agree with you that I have a number. In fact, one of my greatest mentors who was really walked with me on this journey into DEI discipline, she's a white female and she is very astute, practitioner in this space. But what I think makes her really effective is that she knows what she doesn't know, and she knows how to put really smart people in her camp, like Black, Indigenous people of color, to make sure she's approximate to their experiences and that is centered in the conversation, then into the training, into the learning. And so I think that we're saying the same thing, but I also wanted to just affirm that, yes, I agree with you. This is not just, because quite frankly, we need everybody to, whether entitled or not, to own, this work, to own the fact that within our individual spheres of influence, we do have the ability to create that change and to foster greater equity and belongingness. And so I appreciate that. So let's talk about anti-Blackness. As we're mentioning these topics that, again, sometimes are kind of off the table for many, they're not for you, and I love that. Let's talk about anti-Blackness and internalized racism and white adjacency. Introduce for probably many people in this community what those terms mean and why it's important to this conversation right now that's really centered on anti-racism.
Yeah, so I think that since June, a lot of us maybe who weren't as engaged in equity and inclusion work have started to look at our own lives. And I think it's important for the conversation to focus on the dynamic between Black, Indigenous people of color and non-Black, Indigenous people of color, so white people. But I also think that a really important conversation that we don't have as much is anti-Black sentiment within communities of color. And, I think back to, there was if any of you watched George Lopez, he did a stand-up years ago that he got a lot of backlash for, where he was talking about in Mexican families. He said, there's two no-nos in Mexican families. You don't bring a Black person home and you don't park in the front yard or something along those lines. And he got a lot of backlash. But as a comedian, I feel like with every joke, there's a little bit of truth to it. And I didn't understand why he got backlash, because I think that in a lot of Mexican communities and the Latinx community, and I would say a lot of other communities, there's a lot of anti-Black sentiment. And I had a really great conversation with Dr. Kim Tran, who is, she does anti-racism work and really bridging the gap between Asian and Black communities. And we had a conversation on the Diversity Dinner Dialogue where we were talking about the complicated relationship between the Black community and the Asian community. And I think that when we're talking about anti-racism, we also have to look within our own lives and realize, even if you're not a white person, you may hold anti-Black sentiments. And even within the Black community, we have to also have a conversation about colorism and how someone like me, who is a lighter skinned Black woman, may benefit from my proximity to whiteness, and how maybe I'm more palatable to different audiences. I recognize that when people hear me on the phone and then they see me, they're like, oh, I had no idea you look like that. And I think that that's a microaggressive way of saying, I didn't know that you were Black because of the way that you speak. So all of these things we have to recognize, because I think all of these things kind of contribute to our anti-racism efforts. So we have to not only look at, and I don't want the focus to just be white people, you know, I think all of us may have perpetuated things that are anti-Black. Maybe that's, you know, encouraging our kids not to go out in the sun so that they don't get darker. Maybe that's telling our kids not to marry Black people, not to date Black people. I have two of my close friends are Indian, and they both date Black men. And they shared with me that both of their parents are not the hugest fans of Black men in particular, and don't want them to date Black men, and they want them to stay within the Indian culture. So I think that we have to, and I watched a really great show, which you all may have seen, called Indian Matchmaking. It was such a good show. But one thing that I noticed in the show was that it's about a matchmaker from Mumbai who sets young Indian people up. She's like a matchmaker. And when she was asking each of the people what their criteria was, like, what are you looking for in a mate? Almost all of them said someone who is fair skinned. So it's not just, you know, within the Black community, but I know that colorism and the caste system within India is a very prevalent and persistent issue. So I think that when we're talking about how to be an anti-racist and how to dismantle oppressive systems, we have to also look within ourselves and maybe ways that we've perpetuated anti-Blackness within our own lives and our communities.
No, I appreciate that. This is such an important conversation, and it certainly has implications to the way in which we engage around this topic of anti-racism. There is internalized, you know, oppression that I think perpetuates the problem, and we have to recognize that. One of my heartbreaking stories that I sometimes share. I have two kids, and they're not kids, they're grown people now. They're both in college. But my daughter, when she was maybe going to the first grade, I remember she came home one day and she asked if she was adopted. And it was such an innocent but real question. And when I probed a little bit deeper, I realized that her classmates were saying, "You're adopted, you have to be adopted." And when I really started to unpack that, it was because, you know, people were recognizing your mom's light skin, your dad's light skin, your brother's light skin. Why do you have such darker skin complexion? And so she thought she was adopted. And it was the most heartbreaking conversation ever. But so colorism is real, and it has these lasting impressions if we aren't careful to try to correct that. So I appreciate you bringing that to the surface and giving us a chance to amplify it.
And I'm sorry, I just realized I didn't define. So white adjacency is basically when you're a member of a marginalized group, but you position yourself or try to gain access and opportunity by being closer to white. So
Yeah.
that might be through, and I had a student who, I didn't know she was Puerto Rican. I thought just looking at her, I thought she was white, but she shared with me in our diversity and inclusion course that she identifies as white because she recognizes that there are benefits to being white, and looking at her, she looks white. But she's like, if someone asks me specifically more about my cultural background, I'll share, oh yeah, I'm Puerto Rican, I speak Spanish. But, you know, so she recognizes that, and she, you know, she actually aims for that white adjacency and aligning herself more with whiteness because she recognizes that there's benefits that come with that. So white adjacency is when a person, you know, is from a marginalized community, but recognizes that there's benefits that come with aligning themselves with being white or being closer to white.
Absolutely, or because they're white presenting, which means that there's a whole list of privileges and opportunities that maybe they don't have to be negatively impacted by because they're white presenting. And I think that goes to the conversation around just white supremacy and whiteness in general, and how we have to stop perpetuating whiteness as the norm, because it causes people to feel like they have to conform and show up that way, and then they're measured against it if they don't. And so yeah, it definitely has huge implications to this broad conversation.
And one thing that I try to do, that I started trying to do within the last few years, is something as simple as even like wearing my hair in braids or wearing these Afrocentric hairstyles, where years ago I was so afraid. I remember when I had, in 2015, I had my first interview for a professor role. It was an adjunct professor role. And I went out and I don't wear glasses, but I went out and got glasses because I know I look younger than I am. and I wanted to look smart. And I also made sure that I had my hair in extensions so that I didn't have a hairstyle that was too Afrocentric, because I felt like if I walk in with braids, he's not going to hire me. He was a white male, and I was worried that I'm not going to get hired. So I went in with a certain hairstyle. And then years later, I was debating with myself whether it was okay to go into class. And I teach mostly white students, and I was worried, like, is it unprofessional to come in with braids? And all of these things I feel like are not normalizing Blackness. And so I've realized that, like, as a Black person, I have to be comfortable coming in and showing up as who I am, and not trying to conform and change myself so that I'm to be accepted. Because I think the more we do that, the more obscure it is when someone has their hair in an afro or has their hair in a style that we're not used to seeing. So I had to get more comfortable with wearing my natural hair and wearing hairstyles that I enjoy wearing, but I was afraid to wear because I felt like it was not professional.
Yes, no, that in and of itself could be a conversation that lasts for hours. You and I share those sentiments, and as a Black woman, I've also grappled at times with how I wear my natural hair. And I finally decided that, you know what, this is my hair. This is it. And I'm going to embrace it. And I've done just that. But yeah, I was looking at an article that I just recently shared on Twitter, but it's a CNN article, and it was just August 12th. Somebody may find it and put it into the chat, but the title of it is Black Women with Natural Hairstyles Are Less Likely to Get Job Interviews.
I saw that on, maybe it was on your LinkedIn, if you reshared it. I saw that on LinkedIn last night.
Yes. And I did share, I think I may have shared it on LinkedIn as well, but we're not talking about a study that was done a long time ago. We're talking about a study that was done recently, and this article revealing some of the results of that was August 12th this year, 2020. And so, I always like to make sure that I amplify that this whole racism thing is not always just overt and blatant. It's also subtleties, everyday slights, everyday just daily occurrences that we are sometimes unaware of, but it is definitely impacting people in a pretty significant way. So I'm not going to hog this conversation because I could continue to keep asking you questions all day. I want to now give our audience a chance to enter into this dialogue. And so if something has been said so far that you would like some additional clarity on, perhaps you have a question for Dr. Janice Gassam, I want to invite you now to unmute yourself and share that with the community. Or maybe it's something that you want to contribute from a commentary perspective that would benefit this community. Now is your chance to do so. Any thoughts and questions at this juncture?
I'm just reading through the comments, and it's just interesting.
Kamala has raised her hand. Our friend Kay. Kay, I'm so glad you're on. Some of you may remember that Kay was one of my guest co-hosts a while back. And so Kay, please feel free to, your hand is raised, so please feel free to share your comment.
Hi, Janice. I can see your face now.
I can't see you. Let me.
Hi.
Hey.
I'm here.
I see you, Kay.
I know, I'm not recording a podcast in my closet. No, I love listening to you both. Honestly, I'm so pleased that the timing worked out for me to be here. My only request is that the next diversity dinner dialogue be in a more Spain-friendly time zone, please. But no, I wanted to ask you, because I know there's an additional dialogue in the conversation. I know the Kamala Harris discussion has really brought this to the forefront. We don't really do well in the identity and racial identity space with multiples, like multiple identities. Like even you see kind of the messaging around her is like, but she's Black, but she's South Asian, but my brain broke, what just happened? And so, especially given that you come from an immigrant background or a daughter of an immigrant background as well, I'd love to hear your thoughts on, what you're seeing in terms of how to navigate these types of racial dialogues when you don't fit into one box.
I always go by what the person, and thank you, Kay, that was a great question. I always kind of go by what the person, I put more weight on how they classify themselves. And I remember the same dialogue happened when Obama was elected. And because he's half white, because his parents were, he was not Black enough, as in his father was Black, but he was immigrant Black. I think that this came up again. And I remember when Obama filled out the census, the 2010 census, people were mad that he checked Black and not, I don't know if they had biracial or mixed on that census, but I remember there was like some anger around, well, you're not, you're not all the way Black. Why are you putting that? But that's how he identifies himself. So that's what we can go by. But I think that I always look to how the person themselves identifies themselves. And I don't know, I've heard in interviews where Kamala Harris has said, I'm Black, but I haven't heard her personally say I'm Indian, but I recognize that her mother was an Indian woman. So I don't know, I think that I go by what they say and what they look like. I think that's important to kind of just go by this. We all go by the social cues, but I think it's really important for a candidate to be really strong in that, because I think if you're not, people will pull you any sort of way. So it's interesting. I posted the day that they announced her as a VP pick. I posted on my social media, Black Girl Magic. And I posted a picture, and someone came into my DMs and was like, also Asian Girl Magic. She's Southeast Asian, so she's not just Black. So it was just an interesting sort of conversation. And I really had nothing to say to that, but I was like you said, Kay, I don't think we have wrapped our minds around what it means to be biracial or mixed person or multiracial. But I really just go by kind of what a person identifies as. And then also, again, like what I want to say what they look like, because I'm thinking of Rachel Dolezal, and I know she identifies as a Black woman, but we look at her and we know she's not a Black woman. But so, going back to your question, I think it's really important to just kind of listen to how people identify and then go off of that, because that's really important. If you're a mixed person, but you're white passing, which there are, I'm thinking of, there's a singer, and her name is escaping me right now, that if you look at her, I know she had purple hair. If you look at her, she looks like a white woman. But I know she identifies as a mixed woman, or you have women that identify as just Black and they're mixed. So I think it's important to go off of what that person identifies as. I know that was super long-winded. Yes, Halsey, Rachel.
Yeah.
That's her name. Yeah, if any of you are familiar with Halsey, if you look at her, you're not, I wasn't able to tell that she's half Black. So I think that personal identification is important.
This conversation is so rich, and I feel as though we're going to have to start gravitating to a place where we evolve this conversation beyond putting people in boxes, because we're seeing that especially the younger generations now, they are multicultural. They are all types of backgrounds. And, I know of a number of people that sometimes are concerned that they are being forced into a box to choose one way or the other. And so I do like your sentiments around how in which that person is comfortable identifying, and not feeling as though they only have to identify one way or the other, So just, it's really interesting, but a great question that you raised to this fun conversation, Kay. So thank you.
And I see Toki said, to clarify regarding multiracial identity, wouldn't this be part of intersectionality, how the person would identify? Yeah, I definitely think it would be. Because there's unique struggles or unique experiences that the Indian community faces, and also that the Black community faces. So I think that there has to be consideration of that. But I think in this country, we're obsessed with putting people into boxes. We have to know what somebody is. We don't like ambiguity. So we have to know, is this person Black? Is this? So I think even if somebody is mixed, whatever we look at them and we see, that's in our minds what they are. And we're just like, okay, she's Black, or okay, she's, but I think that I'm proud to see, like you said, somebody who understands a little bit about Black culture, even if she's just half Black. She went to a historically Black college and university. She joined a Black sorority. So she has an understanding of, I see people trying to say she's not Black enough also because she doesn't have a Black significant other. So that's also part of the conversation that I've been reading and seeing on social media. But I think, again, we have this like invisible marker within the Black community. There's like an invisible marker of what it means to be Black. And I think that sometimes we're far too harsh on each other, and we have this sort of crabs in a bucket mentality where somebody who doesn't check all these boxes to us is not Black. And I think that that is very divisive within the community. So that's something that I definitely think we need to start having more conversations about.
I feel the strong sense of protection of Kamala Harris in so many ways. And I guess it's because, there are lots that we could argue with, but there's some things that we can't argue with. She is a woman. Mm-hmm. She is a woman of color, and she is the first of those two. And so in my mind, I feel like automatically there's going to be criticism that she's going to be met with, that I think deserves some level of protection, And so anyway, that's me and my thoughts and sentiments, but want to give others an opportunity to unmute yourself and share your question or your comments. Lots of good stuff happening in the chat as well.
Yeah. I see Tony said Harris's background represents a uniquely American melting pot story. I agree. And Sandy said, hi Sandy, I always try to assume positive intent, but it's exhausting when people don't take a moment to educate themselves and look to the marginalized community to provide solutions. I totally agree, Sandy. And I think that's why I was getting frustrated as of late, because I'm on LinkedIn a lot, as Dr. White knows, so I'll just peruse things on LinkedIn, and it just seems like all of a sudden everyone's like an anti-racism expert. People who haven't been doing the work prior to June 1st of 2020. So I sometimes, I just kind of am a little bit leery when I see everyone is all of a sudden an anti-racism expert, and I just don't want people to try to profit off of what's happening in this moment and this movement. And sometimes I see things and I wonder if it's more of a trying to capitalize on what's going on.
Yeah. It's a delicate balance. And I say that from my vantage point because as someone who, again, has strong convictions around this work, I also am keenly aware that we need as many people as possible that are trying to solve for this. And so that what that means is that when those individuals and those organizations try to solve for it in whatever capacity, we have to be careful to not attack them to where they then stop wanting to get engaged, And so it's a delicate balance. It is, and I have found that to be true in at least my line of work as well. And I know you have, Janice, as well. And that's hard.
Yeah, I see Camille said people are shamelessly trying to capitalize on this, pursuing roles they know nothing about. Yeah, I think, Camille, that's my main issue with it is there's so many companies now that have open D&I roles, and I always like to check the receipts. And I say, like, if someone is kind of new to this, it's exhausting work, particularly when you're talking about race, trying to help people understand how nuanced race is and racial identity can be and racial microaggressions. It's exhausting work. So I also think it's counterproductive to put somebody in a position that they might think that they'll do well in, but that they don't have the knowledge base and the experience base to help guide people within an organization.
Okay, so I'm looking through the chat and let's see. Just taking a moment. There's so much good stuff out here, by the way. So definitely make sure that when you get the chat transcript, you spend some time reviewing it. As I'm continuing to kind of peruse the chat, does anyone like to come off mute and ask a question of our guest co-host, or maybe provide some type of commentary to contribute to today's discussion and experience?
Hi, this is Toy. I'm from Memphis, and I just want to say thank you so much for coming on. I feel like we've covered so many topics during this conversation, and I appreciate the anti-blackness conversation, anti-racism conversation, talking about colorism, all these things that affect us every day in the workplace. I appreciate you guys sharing the article about CNN. So thank you for bringing Dr. Janice on. This was awesome. I've learned so much.
Thank you for coming, Toya.
Sure.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. Anyone else at this time? What have been some aha moments for you, or what's been resonating with you?
I see.
So this is Ebony. Again, I wanted to thank you as well. I also follow you on Instagram, and so I've been kind of peeking in there.
Hi, Ebony.
But my kind of question is, how do you, and you just mentioned it as I was typing it, so I stopped. What do you recommend, or how do I obtain the credentials, the experience, the kind of professional information on what's relevant now to kind of approach a company to say that, hey, I'm a D&I practitioner and I would like to lend my services to you. I have kind of discussed this with other practitioners, and some of them say you just step out there. But for me, I always want to make sure that I have, the background. And so I'm trying to figure out how I do this, because I've told that my PhD is not enough. And so I'm trying to figure out what lane would you recommend taking, or is there a certain set of skills per se that you should try to develop before you kind of made that leap?
That's a great question, Ebony. I actually, don't think like you said, I don't think you need a PhD. I don't think you need a master's. I don't even think you need a bachelor's to do this work. I just think it takes experience and the enthusiasm to do it. So one thing that I was doing when I was looking for corporate roles around diversity and inclusion is I was just looking at, so one thing that I did was I was on LinkedIn just following hashtags for a diversity event, diversity workshop, anything related to, because I recognize that any job, 70-something% of the jobs that we get are through our network and through the people that we know. So I recognized how important it is to network with other people who do this work. So coming to this event was a great thing, and just following people on social media who do this work. And I think that what really helped me was I was doing a lot of free engagements where I was doing panel discussions. I was doing free workshops. I was doing lots of free things. And then at some point, I felt like I had done enough free things and I could turn those into more paid opportunities. Because one thing, Ebony, when you come to a company and say, this is my specialty, they want to know, who have you worked with? Who can speak to your work? Who can provide you with the reference? And I didn't have those things starting out. So I recognized that I would probably have to start out doing free things and offering companies. But one thing that I would suggest you doing, and I know that might not be ideal, but in the beginning, doing complimentary workshops for companies so that you have people that can speak to your work, and you have, you can say you've worked with these companies, you've worked with this and that. And right now, I think companies are so like, oh yes, come and do free stuff. And I think that after you do a couple of those, then you can position yourself to reach out to companies and say, this is my background. I've done work with these companies, and these people can speak to the type of work that I've done. So I think that it's going to start off with doing some complementary things, and then also networking and going on. What I would also do is I would go on Eventbrite, and I would literally search diversity. I would search anti-racism. I would search white supremacy, and all of these things will pop up, and then go to each of those events so that you can meet and connect with on LinkedIn other people who do that work, because they'll also be sharing roles that are open and that are relevant to D&I. So those are some places that I would start.
I think that's really good advice, Janice. I would just say that it's also critically important to become a student of this discipline. It amazes me how many people, for whatever reason, they have such a high level of respect and regard for finance, marketing, or all of these other topics and disciplines. But for some reason, DEI is not always seen in that same light. So you have a lot of people kind of raising their hands saying, yes, I can do this. But, you know, I think that those who are most effective, they are students of this discipline, of this industry. So all of those suggestions that Dr. Janice raised are really good. And also, if you are a part of organizations and you know that their DEI work is non-existent, then you may want to raise your hand and just at least start the conversation. I will share that that's actually how in which I got into this space. I saw there was a huge need for it, and I was bold enough to have a conversation with the president and CEO of the agency that I was with at the time to say, hey, we need to be doing this. Here are the reasons why. And it just kind of presented itself with an opportunity, and I had to become really smart really quick. But I became a student of this industry, and so I just encourage you to do the same. I want to take one final question. We have someone, Ethia, I believe. I can't pronounce that. I'm probably not pronouncing it correctly, and I do apologize, but no mic or no camera. So I want to make sure that I center this person's voice into this conversation. The question is, please talk about Blacks running interference, protecting whites from confrontation. What say ye, Dr. Janice?
Could you, or maybe I could scroll through and
so
see.
I'll read it for you quickly. Please talk about Blacks running interference, protecting whites from confrontation. And I'm assuming that they're talking about, because this was in the context of, you know, again, just kind of being true to the work, having strong convictions of the work and not giving people passes. That's the context in which I'm kind of interpreting that question.
I think that a level, and you and I, Dr. White, have talked about this, but there has to be a level of sensitivity when you're having these conversations. And there have been times when I've come into organizations to do work and leadership has said things, microaggressive statements about Black people. And in that moment, I try to correct them in the best way possible, but I also recognize that when you are correcting people, sometimes they can get defensive. So at the end of the day, I think it's important to think about what you can do as a change agent that will lead to the greatest likelihood of change. And sometimes when you come in and you call people out and say, you're racist, you suck, you're horrible, people aren't going to change who they are. So I think that, and I hope that I'm understanding the question correctly and answering it correctly. But I think that there has to be some sort of conversation and level of confrontation, but you also have to be mindful of your job. As a Black person within an organization, you want to keep your job. And as a Black practitioner doing this work, you are working with the client for a reason. So you have to, and it's a fine balance. You have to sort of, you don't want to, you want to solve the ultimate goal, which is producing change. And sometimes that means you have to walk on eggshells a little bit to help people realize something. I don't know if that fully answered the question, but for me, I think you have to walk a fine balance. And sometimes that means when someone says something that's a microaggression and you're not it's in a conversation that you're having with leadership, for example, I'm not able to address every single thing that's said and done. When I'm working with these companies, I try to as much as possible, but I also try to be very sensitive to what they're going to be most receptive to. So I'm not going to come in and say, that was racist, that was this, that was that. I'm going to say, the statement that was made may offend some people. So here's a way that you could maybe reword what you said. This is why some people could have been offended by it. So I think that you have to toe the line. Sometimes when you're working with companies, especially long-term, I've had to do that where I haven't had the opportunity to always call out every single instance of racism. I try to as much as possible, but I think there has to be a level of, you don't want people to get defensive. And sometimes when you use certain words, you especially racist, you call someone a racist, people disconnect and they stop paying attention. So I hope that answered the question a little bit.
No, it was a great question that was raised. So thanks so much. And I think that your points are valid. It is about the goal. Sometimes I always stress that we have to do this work where we're not just being led by our emotions, but more importantly, by our intellect. Let's bring some facts to the conversation. There is a way to call in a behavior and not have to call someone out. And I think that that's an approach sometimes that can keep people willing to engage with you in this way, where there's this level of trust, where they can hear you, they can learn from you, and they can really shift their behaviors and their mindsets. I want people to do the work of racial equity, inclusion, belonging, because of, not in spite of. And there's a difference. And so we have to just keep that in mind as well. And sometimes we aren't maybe the conduit to get the person to the final goal. Maybe you're just planting seeds, and you have to partner with others that have a voice of influence to help bring that person to a place where they can begin to engage in a much more, effective way. So great question, great discussion. I could do this all day. I really could. I want to thank you so much, Dr. Janice, for first and foremost accepting my invite. I always share that when someone says yes, I don't take that for granted. I feel seen, valued, and heard when someone says yes. And that's the same way I feel when Friday from 11 to 12 Eastern Standard Time, I can look to see that there are multiple participants, and I can see your faces. So thank you to each of you that have also joined. I want to give you the final remarks. What would you like to leave this audience with?
So I know there were so many questions and we didn't get a chance to. I saw Dawn ask a question, and I just wanted to say that, and I see Y Hill said, could you provide the link to the class? So I forgot to mention that.
Well, I want to mention it. Yes, please tell us about the class that you're offering, this 10-week virtual workshop, please.
Yeah, so I am offering I'm doing a course on white supremacy and dismantling. So it's unpacking, unlearning, undoing, and there's another U that I'm missing, but it's
understanding, unpacking, undoing, unlearning.
Yeah, white supremacy. So it's a 10-week course, and it's $20 for each class. And part of the proceeds are going to go toward 3 different organizations that amplify and aid Black women. But essentially, we're going to go through the history of white supremacy within the United States, and then talk about how white supremacy shows up in different systems in our country, and then how to unpack and unlearn the white supremacy and anti-Blackness that we were taught since we were young. And I'm getting the link right now to share with you all. But Dawn had a question that I just wanted to go over really quickly, I guess is my final words. So Dawn asked, there's so many new terms and DEI is so vast. How do we learn more and continue the learning process? And one thing that I would suggest is I always try to write about things that are more nuanced and maybe that people aren't talking about as much. So if you follow my articles on Forbes, you'll see and get maybe some additional resources, but I would also encourage you to follow Harvard Business Review. And I have a subscription, I think it's $12 a month. So I'm able to view an unlimited amount of Harvard Business Review articles. And that helps to keep me fresh on my DEI understanding and knowledge. And of course, if you're following Dr. White on LinkedIn, she'll post a lot of articles, and sometimes it's things that I wasn't aware of. So I think following people who are interested in DEI, also Harvard Business Review, I think keeps my knowledge sharp when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I would say, there's something that each of us can do in our own lives to impact change, and that might be amplifying the voices of people who are marginalized. That might be sharing an article with a coworker. That might be having a conversation with a grandmother. There's a number of different ways, but I think each of us have the power to plant those seeds, like you said, Dr. White, that might grow into the seeds of change. So I just wanted to point that out, and I put the link to the white supremacy course in the Zoom chat.
Awesome.
It was a pleasure to speak with you all. Thank you so much for coming and for staying. I know that some people had to drop off because we had passed the time, but it was so nice to see you all and to chat with you all. And I hope you found this conversation interesting.
Thank you again, Janice. Take care.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Dr. White.